and then we'll have the try.
All right, and we're off. Thanks everyone for waiting. Again, I forgot to continue the recurring meeting because it ended in 2022.
Oh,
And so then I had to open up Zoom previous meetings. Anyway, we're here, we're good. This month, we read On Time and Water, A History of Our Future. I will give a quick moment for anyone to pronounce the author's name because he's Icelandic. Anyone knows that?
Magnason.
Magnason, okay.
Emphasize the first syllable in Icelandic.
And that
Okay,
means his
perfect.
dad's first name was Magnus.
Right, that's how it always is,
Right,
like
yeah.
your last name is your parents with the.
Your parents'
Yeah.
first name with son or daughter on the end.
Yeah,
They just go by first names in everyday life
yeah,
because there's no because there's no family name except for your same gender sibling.
I want you to pronounce all those other Icelandic names and words in there.
Vatni Jökull.
Ayafata Where's my cap?
Volcano.
yeah.
No, it's not up there. It's in the closet. I'll have to get it.
But yeah, it's a good book. It's kind of half memoir, half kind of a call to action, half love letter to glaciers. So it's a little bit of everything. I've never heard of him before, but apparently he's world famous and especially very famous in Iceland. He ran for president. One thing I thought was interesting was I think it was his mom or grandma nannied for J.R.R. Tolkien while he wrote The Hobbit.
His grandfather's sister.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, which that was
Yeah,
pretty cool.
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Here.
Anyway, I guess I'll just open it up to anyone who kind of wants to start on points of interest that stood out to you or that you wanted to talk deeper about, and then go from there.
That light was reflecting in there.
Oh. Okay.
This was the same grandpa who operated on the Shah of Iran. Didn't he do surgery on the
Yes.
Shah of Iran
Yes.
as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd had quite a life, it sounded like.
Yeah.
All of them had. And
Yeah.
the other grandpa, he talked about a lot of interesting family members. The other grandpa who claimed to have been on a boat carrying fish to Britain and that went through the flow of nurses. Did you see that?
Yeah, yeah.
Like they didn't know if a hospital ship had
Well, it was during
capsized.
it was during World War II. Yeah, they don't know, it was.
Yeah. Where did the nurses
It was
come
probably
from?
got hit by, well, it was probably, I mean, it was a medical frigate, probably
Oh,
got sunk
probably.
by German U-boat, yeah.
Well, I just thought they didn't know whether he was really seeing things or whether it really happened or not, because there was no news about it anywhere. I'm wearing my Icelandic cap, and it's got the name of the volcano that exploded and kept us from flying for a week or several weeks. And you can pronounce the name.
Eyjafjallajökull.
That's pretty good.
So easy to pronounce his.
Say it again, Lynn.
Eyjafjallajökull.
It's not quite right, but it's close. Eyjafjallajökull. But they don't pronounce a lot of the vowels, or a lot of the consonants, I mean, in their language.
The double L is like a tla, isn't it? Tla?
I'll tell you, it was fun to try to I don't know if you could learn it or not, but you, to be a citizen, you have to learn Icelandic.
Fair enough. I thought that, his storytelling, his strategy of getting to his points through storytelling, stories about his family, kind of reminded me of the book that we read earlier this year about the trees,
Oh, yeah, Finding the Mother Tree.
finding the mother tree.
Yeah,
Yeah, is similar storytelling mechanism.
Mhm. yeah,
And I liked that.
yeah.
What we're really trying to illustrate during the book, the rapidity of how fast climate change is occurring now during the short period of his family's life. And he went back to his great grandfather and stuff. And, you know, and then I'm thinking today, I was talking with friend John Harris, and I said, you know, our great grandson, when he's 90 years old, if he becomes 90 years old, like I am, it'll be year 2420, something like that. And it seems like a long time to us, but it's really almost nothing to the earth. And Lynn, you were in Iceland not long ago. Did you go see one of the, did they take you up to the glacier? The one
Yes,
that we saw when we were there, our guide had said she takes a group every week or so, and it had shrunk during the few months that she had been there, like hundreds of yards.
Yeah.
And where we had to walk for a long way to get to the glacier, she said, now you could use to park right at the end of it. And so where we parked was a long way to the glacier. And I wonder now, that's 2 or 3 years ago, my gosh, several years ago. That glacier may be gone. So climate warming is really fast. They melting a lot of snow. They had rain in Greenland that they've never had for many years, for as long as they can remember, recorded time. They had rain in Greenland.
at the top of the ice cap.
Yes. So, and of course, Antarctica is melting, and they got a big chunk of ice that's starting to float off. The size of, I forget, one of the states, a big chunk.
So they had rain in Greenland instead of snow? Is it
On the
typical?
ice, on the top of the ice cap, it actually rained. It rains around the edges anyway, but on the top of the ice cap.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, Iceland and Greenland are changing pretty fast, faster than Antarctica. The glacier you mentioned, we took the students to, that was Solheim, and that parking area was where the glacier was about 15 years ago. So it is going fast there.
Yeah, that's devastating.
And they estimate that they're going to be okay for about 150 or so years. They get a lot of hydropower from the meltwater from the Highland glaciers. But
Yes.
as those glaciers retreat, then eventually there will be a decrease in meltwater in the rivers flowing through their hydroelectric dams.
Well, and the amount of water that the Chinese and other people use from the Himalayas, and of course we were there not long ago, and it's melting quickly, and so those rivers eventually, in hundreds of years, for human life, we think 100 years, as I mentioned, 90 years seems like a long time, but it's really nothing in the evolutionary time of the planet. So what's going to happen 1,000 years from now? Will Florida be underwater?
Indeed. Well, I noticed he talked about as the glaciers melt, initially, the additional water that comes down, like from the Tibetan area particularly, I think he said, was going to like produce additional prosperity. But then that will disappear.
Yeah.
And there will be no more ever. And so the devastation that that brings about, I mean, that sounds like a pretty grim possibility.
There's a big fuss right now in Arizona, somewhere out by Phoenix, that somebody wants to build a big addition there. And they claim that they have the water for 100 years there. Of course, the authorities, including some of the governors and stuff, are saying, look, there's not going to be enough water to have that kind of an addition and use the amount of water that we use for the civilization to grow that much. And what is going to happen in the earth when we go to 10 billion people? We got 8 billion now. So are we just slowing down our execution date of human life?
Oh, by implementing sustainable
implementing-
practices, you mean?
Yeah, by implementing, trying to eliminate CO2 in 50 years, he wanted to eliminate all CO2 emissions, which seems to be almost impossible dream to me. But even if he did, would that simply slow the progress down? So instead of 4 or 5 generations from now, maybe 10 generations, 1,000 years, who knows?
Yeah, I don't know, that seems kind of, I don't know, nihilistic. I mean, it's the same thing of like, well, you're gonna die anyway.
Yes,
You know.
not me, but somebody.
Well, we all die. Like, is it our life mortality, or is it, you know, the human race, you know? And so what do you do with that, right? Like, yeah, there's weird things like why prolong things, you know, longer than it should, but also, well, I'm gonna die anyway. I might as well just get a crotch rocket and drive 180 miles an hour everywhere. And
But what do we do with the,
there's a level of responsibility, I think, on kind of each side of that.
That's why I liked his approach with his, as Susan was talking about, this personal storytelling.
yes,
Great grandparents to his daughter's granddaughter. Yeah.
well, I think toward the end, didn't he say he lived in the United States from 3 years of age till about 9, and then he moved up to northern of
Yeah, I
Iceland?
forget which parent, but one of them was in the academic world here.
Yeah, one of them was studying alligators and
Yeah, that was an uncle, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
but you know, we use so much energy, and what did it say about the Chinese progress? And of course, the Chinese economy has been improving quite a bit, and they got 20% of the world's population. And India's got another 20%. And all of those people want to live the way we do here. Now, if everybody over there lived and used the resources that you and I use every day, the water I waste, that's pretty grim future for a lot of people. When we were in Africa and Uganda, to the poorest of the poor, thousands of people with little or nothing. Will that happen in the USA 200 years from now or 300 years from now or sooner? It's not a problem for me because I won't be here.
Well, I mean, we could also argue that there's some people living like that now. We just ignore them.
Right.
Ah, we ignore them.
Well, the part of the book that I really enjoyed was his interviews with the Dalai Lama.
Yeah,
To me, those were, they had more to do with sociology and that sort of thing, and our social being, rather than the actual climate, although it does affect it. But I always wondered, about the sacred cow. And that's the first time I'd heard the folklore about it, and I love it.
That was really interesting.
Yeah.
And when we were in India, we saw a few dead cows along the highway and so forth, and nobody touched them. They laid there. I guess eventually the government took care of them, but no, I wouldn't have gone up to it. Nobody I knew would have gone up to it.
We walked around them, there's on the sidewalk, and we just walk around, a guy, golden bull, was just wandering down the sidewalk. He's very gentle. Didn't attack us or anything. Laid down in the middle of the square where a big old busy street in Delhi, and they just drove around it. Fascinating.
I thought the connection of the Icelandic story about the cow and the milk flow, the 4 milk flows,
yeah,
and how that connected up with the Tibetan story.
yeah,
I thought that was really interesting. It's like they're such separate things that
there's this kind of this common thread.
of those 2 stories.
Well, the water, we depend upon the water. Now, we don't depend upon the water from glaciers here in Kansas, but in China and places over there, a lot of those rivers depend on the glacial water. Now, we've read about the Mississippi being so low that they, had to cut the shipping of grain and stuff this summer and this winter because of the low water level in the Mississippi, and the barges cannot move up and down it.
Wow.
The water in the Ogallala aquifer is actually from glaciation in Colorado.
Yes, and
And
it's
it's
about
just
gone.
it's old water.
And it's about gone too.
Right. You've probably seen a lot of articles from Kansas Reflector this month or 2 about that.
My dad was a little boy, and his father and stuff come from Nebraska area, and he had an uncle, Uncle Jim, who lived had a farm in eastern Nebraska in one of those areas, and he used to drive down what they called a sand point, and he could irrigate. He could drive this sand point down 6 or 8 feet, and water would start running because they'd drive it down through the hard pan, and water would just run. And now they have to drill down hundreds of feet to get the water from the Ogallala. But see, that was about 150 years ago, 120 years ago, even, when he could drive a sand point down and get that water. And now it's down 100 feet or more. And they have to use a big pump to get it. So what would you do if they shut the water off here in Lawrence, Kansas for a week? Or how about a month?
I have rain barrels.
Can we come
It
over?
holds
and use
80
them,
gallons. What?
It always frustrates me that our housing, we don't put rain barrels and catch rainwater, and all of these new additions,
Oh, yeah.
all the water that comes from the roof, we could save it all into a tank under each house or around each house, and that could be the water they use for their flowers in yards and stuff.
Mhm.
I don't know why we just don't need it. It's expensive, but eventually we'll have to do something to conserve water.
I believe in Israel, everybody has to have a rain barrel on their house.
They use a lot of solar panels in Israel for the heating of their water.
California is a lot more conservative about water.
Yeah.
Who?
California.
Oh,
Especially
There's
southern-
certain
really
times
southern
you can't
California.
water
Yeah.
your yard and.
the agriculture out there is really suffering right now from the shut off of the Colorado River and the lakes. The big lakes are drying up. But is that due to global warming? I mean, yet the global warming, the glaciers are raising the seawater, sea level, going to raise it by meters in the next few centuries. So there's a lot of water. It's just in the wrong place.
Or we have to take the salt out of it.
And that's the other thing that, well, and Lynn, you'd be able to describe this better than me, but the other thing that climate change does is make that water less predictable, right? So you've got these patterns that were fairly predictable for years and years and years, and now with global warming, you have mudslides because you have so much water, and then you have droughts, and it's this kind of swing back and forth, which makes it tougher to be able to predict. And rain, rain barrels can only do so much between, generational droughts and generational mudslides and rains.
Well, right, and it talked about it messing up, the patterns, the chemical patterns too, the animals, the fauna, the flora, everything.
Yeah.
Has an established pattern now, that all of that could be wiped out and changed.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you're
The
kind of
coral,
in
I had
chaos.
no idea there was cold water coral. I didn't even know that was a thing.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Did you see any coral in Iceland?
I didn't go into the water.
Didn't see any coral, but we saw sponges.
Okay.
And you can see sponges up in the boundary waters too.
Oh, really? Huh.
Where did
So
you
those
see
are
the
mostly
sponges?
make their hard parts out of silica though.
Hmm.
There was a section about. Oh, yeah, here we go. On page 305, it talked about, it's talking about how do we take CO2 out of the air. And it says in 2012, experiments investigated whether CO2 could be absorbed into bedrock. The process involves mixing CO2 with water, converting it more or less to seltzer, pumping it into the soil and allowing it to become in contact with basalt. The resulting reaction forms Iceland spar, CaCO3.
It's just calcite.
The same material coral uses to build its shell.
Yeah.
Which
It's
I
just
thought-
like our limestone here in Kansas.
Okay.
Really?
Composition. Yeah.
So
The
is that a
mineral calcite.
safe way to do it?
Well, it works. And we toured that facility, Helshidi, and it works. But they are able to use the extensive water from the Highland glaciers and the geothermal energy to make that happen in a sustainable fashion. Plus,
Right.
they have this basalt called vesicular basalt, which has these little pore spaces in it. And that's where the calcite grows. So you need to have a porous rock that you can dump that spot into. So that's why it works for them. What they told us during the tour is that the idea now with that particular process is to get it scaled up in other places in Iceland. The other thing they do at that same plant that the book mentioned was they are now pulling CO2 out of the air. That project is still in the very small stages though. That's more like a test project rather than something that's really helping.
I guess, so my question out of this was, so could they use this then to start rebuilding coral and coral reefs? Or is that something completely kind of different?
No, that, because then you'd have to take that saturated calcium carbonate solution and pump it somewhere where it would precipitate and grow the reefs.
Okay,
It's more like it's filling the little holes in the basalt to make crystals that people in 20 million years will rock hound for. Or zeolites for your water softener if we need that in 20 million years.
That's right, that's right. Well, and the other thing that I've heard, the other drawback for carbon capture is it's kind of the silver bullet, right? People say, well, we don't need to change the way we live. We don't need to worry about, we can keep dumping CO2 wherever we want it because we have carbon capture and it'll save everything. And that's kind of it's not a true drawback, but at least in the way we talk about it, it has to be qualified for, and I think he does it well, to say, yes, we need to stop putting any CO2 anywhere on the planet and start capturing and, doing these processes as well, both
Right.
and,
yeah.
not either or.
Right.
So,
I'm wondering what unexpected consequences there are, because, like fracking was the greatest thing ever, but now we're finding out that, especially in Kansas and Oklahoma, we're having a lot more earthquakes. So what, where do we get the balance?
Sure. One unintended consequence would be if the growing the calcite in the basalt occurs over a large enough area, that makes the rock have less open spaces, which means groundwater doesn't flow through it as easily. And there are a lot of beautiful places in Iceland which are waterfalls from groundwater, not necessarily a river on the surface, but it comes out through the rock, which has traveled dozens of miles from some highland glacier. So wherever they're doing the carbon sequestration into the rock, that rock will be less porous.
Right.
So it won't be something that could be a conduit for groundwater in the future then.
yeah. Yeah, didn't thought about that, but.
Yeah, so there could be issues with the cure as well.
Yeah. But like Chuck said earlier, it won't be our problem.
That's the reason we don't do much about it, because it's somebody else's problem. It's like ignoring the poor people. If you don't see them, you can ignore them.
Yeah. So if there was a lot of water, say in central New Mexico, that would be a possible location for the US to do this type of thing. But there isn't that much water.
Oh,
There's a lot of basalt
And the
deposits there.
And the aliens.
Yeah, there's a lot of recent volcanic lava flows. Yeah.
Then I didn't follow that. What did you say in the middle of Mexico?
If the region of New Mexico or say Idaho had a lot of water, those would be possible locations in terms of the rock type for the US to do some carbon sequestration in the basalt.
Okay, you said New Mexico.
yeah.
New Mexico or Idaho would be good
Or
possibilities if they had water.
But they don't have water, or?
Well, those are both kind of arid semi-arid regions. So
Oh,
they
okay.
don't have,
Susan had the same question I did. What about Oregon? Are there basalt deposits there? Oregon, Washington?
yeah, they're from Bend over.
Yeah.
But that starts getting dry also.
Yeah, yeah,
So
right.
they get more rain than New Mexico
Yeah.
usually.
But you're talking a ton of water, right? I mean, it's not just, by rainfall, it has to be
Oh,
like ocean water, right? Isn't that kind of how that works?
It depends on where in Iceland they're doing that.
Oh, okay.
okay.
We toured one area that is saltwater geothermal springs.
Yeah,
but the rest were fresh groundwater.
oh, I see, okay, so it doesn't have to be,
Okay.
I was thinking saltwater, I thought it had to be
Doesn't have to be saltwater.
ocean
though.
level, no, it didn't tell me.
Well,
Well,
go ahead.
Iceland is very interesting because it is, it has the glaciers, but it also has the volcanoes. And to me, that's a very interesting phenomenon that
Seems like the big problem of capturing the CO2 that we've already released because we burned up all the coal and oil. And the faster we burn up more coal and oil, we're releasing all the CO2 that was stored millions of years ago in the form of coal and oil. So maybe somehow we need to invent ways to store this CO2 in trees and stuff that we can bury and become coal and oil a million years from now. Where's our scientists to do that? To capture this CO2 out of the air through the trees, which the trees can't grow without CO2. And all the corn that we grow, alfalfa, and soybeans and vegetables.
If we
Well,
planted
it
enough trees, it would be a head start. I think the more
It
trees,
does-
In the right places.
right, yeah, yeah. What were you saying, Lee?
We read that book a while back, set in Ile-de-Jean, Louisiana, this water level rising.
Yes.
And one of the things with that is the importance of seagrass. That actually pulls a whole lot of CO2 out as well. Fairly competitive with trees. So even though it doesn't seem very efficient, it seems like the best worldwide approach is piecemeal.
Yeah.
Yes, trees, improve seagrass habitat. So more reefs can build and pull that calcium carbonate out of the water, things like that.
Well, and he
how
talks
does
about the
the
importance of,
acidity of the water affect that?
Yes, and that depends on temperature, which kind of depends on depth as well. So there's a zone in the ocean where more calcium carbonate can be dissolved in acidic water where it's kind of warm. And then eventually you get deep enough where even though it has that acidity, it's colder. And then the calcium carbonate is no longer redissolved. But that's really deep. It's not where, we're doing much. There's not as much life.
Well, if we melt enough of the ice, the water will be deeper.
Yeah.
perfect. Always the optimist, Chuck.
And of course, there'll be less land for people to live on because we cover it up with water and seagrass. At least we won't have as much CO2.
I was looking for because he talks about the importance of that space, because he names that, right, with the wetlands, how important the wetlands are, and some of that vegetation. The part about the emptiness, right? He uses the line about the hole for the axle and the hole, the space in the clay pot, and doors and windows. There's no point to have a wall if you don't have a door or window in it, right?
Yeah.
For existence to bear fruit, what does not exist is most useful. And 136. So he talks about emptiness and marshland and all of the space. And I think there's
Emptiness allows the wheel to revolve. Throughout the 20th century, we've demanded that the earth turn a profit, that it produce ever greater output. We have filled up more and more of its emptiness and called that common sense.
Yeah.
What's this marshland for? Why all these flies?
Right. Which is exactly what New Orleans said before Katrina, and
Right.
you know, basically the storm surge stopped, or wasn't slowed down by the wetlands like it had been for generations, and sure enough, the marshland was pretty important.
Well, it's biblical, right? Like, hey, every 7 years, you should let your ground go fallow.
Yeah,
Right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
there needs to be these breaks. And he
Right.
mentions, what if we just not drive our cars once every 10 days?
Mm.
There we go. We've saved 10% of our
10%.
CO2 emissions.
Yeah, once a week is 15%.
Like,
Yeah.
what if we just not have our factories run for
Right.
once a week?
Right,
Right? There's, you know,
Yeah,
you got a point.
yeah,
It just means certain people won't be, they will only be a single billionaire instead of multi-billionaire.
right. Right. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, the whole point about, you know, how humans perceive that something has to serve a purpose for it to
Mhm.
justify its existence.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
For an area to be protected, it says it needs to serve as a national park or a tourist destination.
Mhm.
Its purpose needs to be measurable.
Yeah.
What does not exist is not considered useful in itself. Emptiness, the axle's hole, is constantly impinged upon until it now seems life's wheels have stopped turning.
Yeah, I like the, on page 301, I don't know if y'all got into that or not, the four categories, the four things that,
Mhm.
first things that we should do.
I love the women.
Right, yeah.
I think it's too low on the list for me.
Right. But yeah, I mean, reforestation or restoration of wetlands and rainforests is on there. Food waste and dietary changes, developing solar wind energy, and empowering women. I'll admit that was a surprise to me. And then he explains why.
Yeah,
And it's brilliant. Did you read that part?
No, I haven't gotten to that part.
Yeah,
yet.
it's pretty near the end. Let me see if I can.
Give me a key word.
Let me see if I can read, the three, women's empowerment.
you want me to read the paragraph?
Yeah, 304.
Yeah, some might think that women's empowerment is not an environmental issue, but research shows that girls' education ensures families' well-being, and that the best way to cope with population growth is to allow women to make their own decisions about when and whether to have children. Thus, equality is one of the most important solutions to future environmental problems. It is not enough to know what the solutions are. We need to show measurable changes almost immediately if we are to cease emissions by 2050.
Well, obviously, he doesn't believe that Congress has the right to tell a woman what to do. Well, now we just got to change that attitude.
I commend him in his holding of tongue to his ideas of American policy. Every once in a while, he lets you know.
It sneaks in, yeah.
But he does well in not just blatantly
Right,
critiquing,
right.
but he does.
Yeah.
Back to the, keeping openness. I listened to a podcast and kind of talked about the pros and cons of Teddy Roosevelt's park system thing, right? It's like, on one hand, yes, it's great that we designated this land so that we're not developing it, but also we basically just made it for white people. Like, we kind of had to kick people off who were already living on it.
Mhm.
And then we made it basically, as you said, a tourist, we have to make it a destination in order for it to have value, and we actually didn't really keep its inherent value.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Have you seen anybody seen the PBS, documentary about national parks. History of the national parks.
It's all part of it, different times.
It's been around a while. Yeah, that is interesting.
Isabel.
Well, and I'm struck, so I'm reading this book alongside of Sunday sermon work, thinking about do not worry. God takes care of the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and kind of setting it alongside of this idea of you can't worship both God and mammon. And it feels like there's, I haven't put my finger exactly on the connection, but it feels like there's some connections there between kind of the pursuit of wealth, the pursuit of acquisition, and some of what he's talking about, and worshiping stuff, and getting stuff and building stuff can feel a little bit anti-Sermon on the Mount, a little bit.
Well, you get into that religious stuff and you get a lot of problems. Is religion anti-climate control? I mean, my dad used to say, well, God loved the poor people. He made so many of them. And let me tell you, when you go around the world, as we've been lucky enough to do, and most of the people of the world, compared to the people in Sojourners class, I'll just use that so small group. Most of the people in the world are very, very poor compared to those our group in Sojourners.
Right.
You go around those 7.5, 8 billion people, I would guess that 90% of them are classed as poor.
Yeah, the picture he painted of India, right? Wasn't it India where there's just a wall between this incredible opulent wealth and basically
the guy in the t-shirt.
Yeah, the guy in the t-shirt and all the pools and everybody, and then on the other side of this wall is this incredible heartbreaking poverty.
Well, it was so interesting when we were in India, they were having a nurses strike. But what they did is they brought in the people from the countryside to do the striking. And so we walked around the block and there was all these buses where they'd bus these people in, with t-shirts and stuff hanging out of the windows, because that's where they were living during this time. But they were the poor people, but they were being paid to do the protest.
They would give them $1 a day or something to come up, just stand around and block the sidewalks and the streets, which is fine. They needed $1 anyway. That was big money for some of those folks.
But it was so interesting to me how that dynamic worked.
Well, I noticed in the book he talked about how it's the poorer countries that are going to be hit the hardest when the glacier water dries up, or
always suffer the first. They have just look. You talked about the extreme poverty. Hey, you can go right here in Lawrence, Kansas, and you can see $1 million houses, and 3 or 4 miles away you can see people living on the street. Now that's extreme. And the people that live on the street here can go to Harvesters Saturday and get food. Or they can come to our church, First Baptist Church, and get food. Well, yeah, but there's food available. And nobody in Lawrence, Kansas should be starving to death right now. But there are people in Africa and people on the borders coming up from Ethiopia and places in South America are literally starving to death. The kids are not getting enough food. And, I got more than I need. Let's face it. I guess I have to feel guilty about it.
Well, I don't know about guilt. I mean, I think there's maybe guilt is the proper response, at least awareness. You know, what are we doing to help? What are we doing to make a difference? I mean, I think having conversations like this is a starting point. But then what? What do we do? What do we do with this knowledge? What do we do with this awareness?
There's a chapter in the book about more words.
Mm-hmm.
Did
Yeah, I
you
like
read
that
that
one.
chapter? Just more words. We just changed the words. Guilt. We don't like the word guilt, so I'll just say, well, be conscious of it. Don't be guilty. Just be conscious. Thank you. I'll just be conscious. I won't be guilty anymore. Matt.
Well, it depends. I mean, guilt can be a very good motivator, but it can also be a very bad motivator. I think that's where a lot of folks are on climate change is they say, well, I don't want to feel guilty, so I'm just gonna numb myself. I'm gonna ignore it. I'm gonna pretend it doesn't happen. I'm gonna listen to the people that trumpet, you know, these alternative facts about climate change. And so in my sense, is there a way to do it that, you know, enough guilt to be aware, but not enough guilt to create apathy. And he talked about that too, right? He talked about, you know, kind of global panic versus global action. And what's the difference? How can we get enough guilt that doesn't paralyze us, I guess.
Well, and enough panic to create urgency, but
Right.
not paralysis, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I keep going. I quoted it on Sunday. I keep going back to Don't Look Up. This movie, this movie that basically, I mean, it's funny, but it's not. I mean, basically, as soon as some of the scientists in the movie started getting, you know, pretty serious and loud about it, then everybody shut off, right? They wanted to talk about you know, who was dating who, and it's like, well, this is not. So yeah, we want to create enough guilt, but not to the point that people turn off because they don't want to feel guilty.
Mhm.
So yeah, you're right, Chuck. I mean, we gotta own some of this. But how do we speak that doesn't run people
Well, I
out of it?
think Magnason's approach is similar to one by an author of another Icelandic book I read recently, and that is to make it through storytelling and culture.
Yeah.
Because that's where the empathy grows from
Right.
stories.
Yeah.
And that's much more has a much more positive effect than oh, we're awful, we're doing all these things to ruin the environment. And that's kind of been a big change where I used to work with some of us anyway, who really switched gears over the last 10 or so 15 years to try and keep the hope part rather than the dread and everything is bad part going, just to keep the hope part and to say, well, what are solutions we can come up with, you know, focus on those instead of so much of the guilt.
Yeah, that's the last part of the book is the hope and the things and the science that can maybe fix things. And we do have that hope, at least I do have the hope that mankind will figure out a way to get along with each other and stop killing each other with drones and bombs.
But hope isn't just something to have. It should have actions.
It's got to have feet.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also not to find a solution to the problem, but let's stop causing the problem, right? Like, oh, let's try to find alternative fuels and alternative this, and it's like, that's great, yes, we should, but we should also stop causing the need to do that.
Yeah.
Right, which goes back to lilies of the field. Like if we actually just look at what the stuff God gave us instead of trying to find more than what God gave us, then then we wouldn't need
right.
to be, you know.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast this afternoon about the lilies of the field passage, and they were drawing it back to the manna passage, right? You know, don't take more than you need. just take enough for the day and you'll be fine. And there's very similar connections to all of this, right? If we just didn't hoard and didn't stockpile, then some of that would feel different, I think.
Right, and didn't overproduce, and then as a result, didn't waste.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, the stuff about, I mean, I don't know why this wasn't more obvious to me before now, but the stuff about the post-war stuff about, you know, we needed all this industry that created all this metal. And so what do they do now? Well, let's create single-use metal cans, right?
Right.
And single-use
Aluminum.
plastic. And it's like, oh, wait, that's where that came from. Was basically the industry that was there and needed to keep making money. And you know, it feels so obvious to me now, but it didn't before the book.
Right, yeah, so let's flood this highland, you know, natural resource to keep producing this.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
Oh, yeah.
we'll
with
never get that back.
Yeah, the dam.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right, Len. There's something about the way he talks about that feels doable. I mean, it's still, I mean, oh, okay, let's just stop putting CO2 in the air by 2050. I mean, okay, let's do that. I mean, obviously, you know how big a deal that is, but it feels doable. I mean, it feels like, all right, well, people, if industries stopped making railways the way of the future and said, well, we're gonna do this different thing now. Why can't we do that with energy, right? I mean, how many train companies went out of business because they were like, well, we gotta do the train thing, right? But if they said, well, we're gonna be you know, people movers, whatever that takes, or we're gonna be transportation companies. And I think if we could get some companies to say, well, we'll stop being oil companies and start being energy companies, then maybe 2050 is doable. I don't know, it still feels pretty huge, but it feels more doable after this book for whatever reason. I don't know what he did, but.
Right, well, yeah, that seems like it would be a huge part of it, because the places that are currently oil producers, that's their whole
Right.
economy,
Yeah.
their whole livelihood, you know, there has to be an alternative for them, something to shift into.
Right.
Well, like, I think what gave me that inspiration was the section of like, well, it only took what, 50 years? No, 60 years, 65 years to go from flying to the moon.
Yeah, right.
Right, like,
Yeah.
if we actually put our heart to it, we can find pretty, like, unfortunately, it only took us like, what, 6 years to develop the A-bomb.
Yeah, right.
Like,
yeah.
and then it was talked about the places in Africa went from like third world country to iPhone.
Right.
Right, like,
Right.
these technological leapfrogs, leap jumps, whatever you wanna call it, like, are possible.
Right.
Like, we can like
Yeah.
come up with things that were completely impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, which exactly,
If
they
we-
feel
if we-
impossible,
if we
but
put our
they're
minds to it.
not.
Right. Yeah.
Urgency is created.
Right.
But the problem is like where all this other stuff was driven by money. Like, it's not, like, money doesn't necessarily drive sustainability. Like, that's
Right.
kind of the point of sustainability.
Right, yeah. I mean, the comparison of the moonshot is, you know, everybody felt a need and, okay,
Well, there
we
was a
could do
fear
this.
of
Right,
being
right,
defeated by the
Exactly.
Russians and then communism. Like, the
Exactly.
space race was mainly like
Yeah.
anti-communist.
Yeah. And it feels like there's just some pretty inherent, conflict in some folks' minds to say, well, we can't do this because, for whatever, all these other reasons that we've talked about before.
We just need to make up a propaganda that says, don't let communists win, you gotta make.
That's right.
we gotta get to the green,
That's right.
the green deal first.
Well,
The commies
that's
will
not
win.
that hard. Let's be anti-China here. I mean,
You're right.
we could, you know, convince some folks on that argument, I
Yeah,
think.
can we make the Red Scare, a good
Right,
thing?
yeah.
Like a healthy,
Could we create a space race, right? Could we create
Right,
The
a green race.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in World War II, I suppose it was, you know, defeating the Nazis, defeating the,
Uh-huh.
Japan,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
the Axis countries.
Yeah.
That's
Just,
fine.
So you wanna stop making CO2, which means we gotta stop burning coal and oil and gas. Which the source of energy, of course, ultimately comes from the sun. And I'm not a scientist enough to know, even though I took a lot of chemistry and stuff. The only other source of energy, as far as I know, is the splitting of the atom, which become the atomic bomb. And of course, when you split an atom, you cause an explosion, and it releases energy somehow. This nuclear scientists can describe that to us. But anyway, we got to do away with utilizing the sun's energy that makes things grow, and use the sun's energy just for the heat, the radiant heat, somehow, whether that's solar power or wind power, which the sun, of course, makes the wind move because of the temperatures, and the rain, and the water, and the melting. So what are we going to do in 10 million years? They say the sun's going to die. So again, I won't worry about 10 million years from now. I'm just worrying about the next tomorrow. In other words, and I wake up in the morning and I say, thank you, Lord, this is another day. I'll do the best I can. Now you had me wake up. You got to do something, because that's all there is. I don't have any other purpose. Don't have a lot of purpose. And that's a discouraging thing for the soul man, let me tell you. You know, because it says the real purpose in life is to help somebody. There's no real other purpose if you're not helping somebody. So maybe I could have a coffee with somebody, or do some cooking around the house, or help Marcia clean. But that's not very productive. That's just a consumer. I'm kind of a parasite. Woe is me. So
Well, that's not the truck I see. I see a truck that comes to mobile food pantry, and one who is there on Sundays, welcoming these little kids that are coming and introducing yourself and making sure they're feeling welcome, and going out of your way. And yeah, I mean,
if I didn't wake up tomorrow morning, that wouldn't be a big loss. Nobody would have a big loss.
well,
Disagree.
I don't know if I could agree with that one.
There's a lot of people in this room that would disagree.
I think we all agree. Let's vote.
Well, thank you, but
Well, but that it does bring up a point of like knowing what your purpose is. Like, yeah,
Right.
we can't prevent the sun from burning out,
No.
but there are things we can. Like we have science to back up. Like, hey, we started this,
Right.
and we have the purpose to and the ability. If we have the ability to do it, then we have the purpose.
Right, I mean, here we go, reduce food waste and make dietary changes. Developing solar and wind energy, electric powered transport. Work on conservation of forests. I mean, these are things we can do. Empower women. I mean, Chuck, do not tell me that you and Marcia did not empower women when you brought Sheila into your house and said, this is you know, an important opportunity for us to say, this woman matters, and the way that we can, I mean, that's a global shift right there.
she'll be a really good nurse, since you help a lot of people. That's one thing I
A lot of
dream
people.
about her future, being helping a lot of people.
That's right, that's right,
Create a ripple effect.
that's right. Yeah. And she inspires more, and back home especially. I mean, how many folks tell her story back home and say, okay, we can do that too.
Mhm. Inspiring.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of young people are leaving Iran.
right?
A lot of them are trying to and can't.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Her sister went to France.
Oh, really?
Her younger sister.
She
20 years
studied,
old. Yeah, art, but she had to take a French class first, and now she's actually doing her studies. But she
Okay.
wants to emigrate to Canada, and she can do that through France.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense.
Part of the problem, I think, is we don't realize all these underlying things, because I don't think Americans have any idea of immigration rules and
Yeah,
what goes into immigration at all.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Yeah. We do it.
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about crocodiles.
Crocodiles, gharials, alligators, caimans.
I love the
Right.
fact that there's only one word in Icelandic for all that.
But there's 70 words for snow.
For snow. I love the fact that his aunt was the nanny for Tolkien.
Yes,
Yeah.
As he was writing The Hobbit.
yeah. That's great.
Stories make a difference, don't they?
Well, but I think that, and that's another part, is like all these small things. Yeah, that holds meaning,
Mm,
and it didn't cost, billions of gallons of oil to do it,
yeah,
right? Like, where is our worth? What is the meaning of life?
yeah.
As Lynn said, it is in the storytelling. If we focus on that, put our focus on, and not, trying to climb corporate ladders, or, traveling the world it's to me is difficult, because it's like, yeah, I think seeing some of that stuff and realizing the importance of
Yeah,
all those cultural things around is decent. Like, it costs,
yeah.
resources, right? Like, again, focusing more on
Like the way he waited.
where you come from, right? This idea of touching back and touching forward in time for, 250 years. Like, oh yeah, you're maybe a speck, but you're touching 250 years,
Mhm.
right? Like, your life isn't just the 80 years you have on
Yeah,
Earth. It's
yeah.
the people before and after you that.
Well, and the point about connection, I mean, I kind of feel like that was one of the reasons maybe he brought up the connection of his grandfather's sister,
Mhm.
being the nanny for the Tolkiens.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
those are connections that you make that are you influence, we influence each other,
Yeah.
in ways that maybe we don't realize,
Right.
which could also be the solution to this problem, right?
Mhm.
We have the influence and we don't realize the power of that.
Right.
And I think he's telling us to leverage that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's what it's gonna take.
Right. Which I look at the folks in this room as pretty good examples, not only Chuck, but pretty much all y'all as pretty good examples as doing your best to leverage some of this. And yeah, you're right, Chuck. We could all wake up in the morning and say, what could we do better? How could we do it differently? But I see some pretty good eco heroes. Yeah.
If anyone doesn't have anything else, I can end on a little benediction via page 189. Our mother, you are the earth. Your kingdom is here, holy is your water. You grow for me my daily bread until I merge into you, the eternal cycle of life and splendor.
Well,
Nice.
Amen.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see y'all